Maureen Metzger can look back over a long and fascinating career as a British teacher in the German education system, and she has an unusual story to tell. Most British teachers can only spend a short time in German schools, usually as a language assistant, but Maureen spent 25 years in a Berlin gymnasium, or a German grammar school. Not only that, but she taught for a while in the USA, and she's taught in English schools, English secondary schools as well, but that's not all. I've come to meet Maureen here at the German School in London. Now, it's a private school set up by the German government in association with local schools, and it serves the German language community here in the London area. She taught English and history at this school for 10 years after returning from Berlin, and still teaches here part-time. So she's got lots of stories and comparisons to share with us. Now, Maureen, how would you describe the main differences in the German education system?
Well, one of the main differences is that it is a very long-standing system. Its origins are in the 18th century from Prussia, 1871 with unification. Public state-funded education, sometimes low fees, was established throughout the German Empire, emanating from Prussia. This led to teachers actually being civil servants, and they worked for the state and were seen as state officials. It was reinforced in April 1933 with a law passed by Hitler to reinstate, as he put it, or as it was put, the civil servants and the civil service. This meant they had to be Germans practically, they had to have German education, and it was a very easy way of getting rid of Jews, foreigners, undesirables from the system. This law is still functioning, and in a way, so that its teachers are all civil servants. You have to be German to be a civil servant, although now you can also be a EU citizen, but that's quite recent, and it certainly wasn't in my case applicable at all. So that you're excluded from any promotion, any function within the school, and you are basically sort of a reserve extra kind of teacher in the school system. You're you're doing the same work for much less money and much less privileges. For instance, German civil servants have their healthcare largely paid for. They have more money, they get better pensions, things like that.
So did you become a civil servant?
I couldn't. You didn't automatically become a German citizen. You had to live there for 10 years. It cost a lot of money.
Did this stop your career in any way as a
Absolutely.
teacher?
I mean, there's no question that I was always, many years, just sort of helping out, filling in gaps and things like that. And later on, when I had a permanent contract, where we had to go to court to get it. My husband was a judge, so he knew that they were doing a few things formally incorrectly. And that meant that I never really had any position of authority or any function within the school at all. And certainly you would, anyway, to do that, you'd need to have very, very good German. I mean, I think I could probably do it now, but I definitely couldn't do it when I first went there.
So there you were, a young English teacher, faced with the German school system. What was it like?
Obviously, things are very different. And actually, most of the time I was bemused. I didn't know what was going on. The conferences, they could have been speaking Chinese, so far as I knew. Loads of bureaucracy, filling things in, forms, totally different. I think for a long time I just sort of stayed on the edges and tried to survive.
Tell us about the German education system.
Well, they have in the gymnasium, they have about 10 subjects. They start in Berlin in the 7th year, in other German states in the 5th year, so they're very young. And they have to carry these subjects all the way through to the very end. At the time it was 13 years, now in many states it's 12. You can drop very little. That means that you have to be examined in the end in the social sciences, the sciences and the humanities. And that means you cannot, as in the United Kingdom, choose just what you're good at. You're forced, like my daughter was, to do mathematics to the very bitter end. And I was speaking to her today, and she said, well, yes, it was a waste of time, but in fact, for her, it did help later. And the fact that she had to do science, biology was a great help when she studied psychology. She's a psychologist.
So right up to the age of 18, all those compulsory
Right.
subjects.
And also sport is compulsory, which for girls is a very good thing.
Now that is in one land, in the land of Berlin,
Yes.
the region of Berlin. What about the rest of Germany?
The state is much more controlled from the centre. And this goes down. I mean, you cannot have a school where the teachers are not trained. It's absolutely unthinkable. And there's no way that you can avoid the national or the state curriculum. You can't say, I'm not going to do this.
So there is a national curriculum.
There is a framework for a national curriculum, and each land adapts it as it sees fit. And there's no way that any teacher can avoid this. You have a book where you fill in what you're doing. This gets checked at the end. You also have a class book. This also gets checked to make sure that you are following the curriculum.
But on the whole, what you're describing is actually a very stable system, pretty much
Exactly.
unchanged from
Yes.
the German Empire.
Well, this is the big difference, major difference, is that here everything's changing all the time. And I saw my mother's school leaving certificate the other day. Unrecognized, nothing that you could say, oh yeah, well we still do that. Nothing at all, completely different. But my mother-in-law could very easily understand what my children were doing. Her leaving, her report cards.
Your German mother-in-law.
The German mother-in-law, that's right. Her report cards, they're still similar. The names, Oberstudiendirektorin, and so they're still the same titles. It's very hierarchical. And I certainly can say that my husband's report cards were nothing that we couldn't understand or that my children can't understand or relate to even. So it's the structures and the outward structures have stayed very much the same.
How did a young woman, a young teacher from England, experience this very strict German system?
Well, it was hard. I mean, we're not trained for bureaucracy. We're not trained for being very thorough, particularly. It doesn't matter if it's more or less all right, it's fine. So, and you're not trained to be very punctilious or to be punctual all the time. So that meant I was either getting told off or late or had done something wrong. I mean, they were quite patient quite often with me. But certainly I had to change my habits, yes.
What kind of students does this system in Germany produce?
At my husband's time, it would produce very serious people who my husband learned practically perfect English at school, for instance. I mean, he certainly was better than most, but he did learn that at school. And a lot of people get very disgruntled. It's demanding system, and I think probably for some children it's too demanding to be doing all these subjects.
Why do you think the German system is rated so highly?
Well, I personally think it's because of the apprenticeship systems and because of the fact that you have Berufsschulen, sort of you learn, you can leave at 16 and you have to stay in some kind of school or training until you're 18. You're not just doing car mechanics, you're doing English, German and maths at the same time. And I think that is a very good system indeed. And that is what makes it so good, is this middle level, which is so weak in the United Kingdom, of students who are not going to university, are still in school, still in training, and still being forced, quite often against their will, to do something academic.
If you personally were to sum up what do you think the main characteristics of the German system are, from your point of view, from your personal experience?
My personal point of view is this long sense of continuity, of almost a monolith, and almost as a support structure of German society almost, is the school system. However much they fight and argue and carry on, it hasn't, as we've seen, many structures have not really changed, and it's a very permanent part of German society. If you look at the school buildings in Berlin, they're solid, they're also symbolizing the state in a way, in making a statement, some of these buildings. And I think that it gives, even school bags or the tutor or whatever, I think it gives Germans a sense of continuity and permanence. I do think that, if you want to criticize, I think what also happens is the staffs are all together, the teachers together sometimes for 40 years. And the average age at one point of the teachers in Berlin was 50. And this is not very good for very young children or young teenagers, because you're just a generation apart, or 2 generations sometimes, On the other hand, you can have some very learned people teaching there as well. I mean, there's always a Frau Doctor or a Herr Doctor somewhere in the staff.
Maureen, if I walked into your German classroom, what are the main differences I would see?
Obviously, you see no uniforms, but you'd see teachers, children quite often just standing around in groups talking, and 9 times out of 10 they'll continue talking. So that you quite often have to really make a statement when you walk into the room. It's not all, it depends on your own discipline in the classroom in Germany, depends on your own personal charisma, authority. There's nothing much backing you up. You can't send people to the headmaster or things like that. And my nephew was sent to the headmaster recently and had to write lines. You know, I will not disturb the class 100 times. Non-existent.
Here in the UK?
Here in the UK. But unthinkable in Germany. I mean, practically crying to do that. The parents would be in an uproar.
Now, we're going through major education reforms in this country. What do you think the two countries, Germany and this country, can learn from each other?
I think the German system has, to begin with Germany, I think they have learned a lot of innovative teaching methods, in my opinion, are coming to the United States and for the UK over there. And I think, and so they're looking forward at the moment and changing, especially after the PISA report in 2000. And I think it's really bad what's happening in the United Kingdom. I think you need to have some kind of stability. You can't keep switching back, and you certainly can't turn back the clock to the 1950s. It's just not possible. And I think that they could take a leaf from German education, changing, if they're going to change, more gradually, still maintaining certain things as well, and not being quite so radical in the changes that take place. Secondly, I feel they should not ignore the profession of teachers in this country. I think that the English system should accept the principle that all teachers should be trained as they do in Germany. Yes, not only do they have MAs, but they have 2 years of teacher training afterwards.
So all teachers qualified, even the teaching assistants?
Right. Everybody has the equivalent of an MA, teaching in secondary schools. And I disagree entirely with the idea that enthusiasm and wonderful ideas substitutes for education and for training. I really do. And I think that's a very, very important and very admirable part of the German system.
What do you personally feel most strongly about in education at all? Your own personal motivation, your own personal approach to education. How would you describe it?
Most deeply for me is that the humanities, and especially language and literature, should not get lost under a pile of computers and whatever. I feel that literature tells us about life, how to live, and I don't think that it should be ignored, and at least at the level of secondary education, and considered somehow useless or just a little, addition to one's life. I think it's important. I think also history is very important. And I think both these subjects should not be denigrated to secondary has-beens or, right? But I also feel that language teaching should be a core subject. And I think it's another thing that should be in the United Kingdom. To say that you can give up teaching language at 14, I think is a mistake. I know you cannot learn a language like that. And just to pick, 2 years Mandarin, you cannot learn a language that fast. It's impossible. It took me 10 years to get really fluent in German. And I think it's only now that they most of the time don't even notice I'm not German. It's a long process. And it was the same thing with my own children. And there are brilliant people who are exceptions, but my children only now in their 30s are truly, truly bilingual. So 2 years doing a bit of German or a bit of it is practically window dressing.
Maureen Metzger, thank you very much for this interview. Thank you.
Thank you.